The Mishnah on Daf Yudal Damad Aleph. Sagt the Heilige Mishnah, Bei Shammai Yoimrim, Bei Shammai say, Tavlin, you have spices, Nidoichim b'modech shaleitz. So if you want to crush it, you should use a wooden pestle to crush it, which means that you're not using the regular stone or metal pestle, you're making some kind of a shinui in what you're doing here. Of course, we're talking here about something which would be the malacha of teichin. You're grinding on yantif. So Beishamai is saying it could be done on yantif, but with a certain shinui. The hamelach, when it comes to salt, has to be done with a much bigger shinui. The pach, you can take the Rashi says, an earthenware flask, and you should pound it with the weight of that, or beitza potter, or with a wooden ladle. Again, with a shinui, but the point is, by salt, the shinui has to be a much bigger shinui than when it is with the tavlin, the spices. Beisil will say, tavlin, nidoichin kedarkan. When you come to crush the spices, you can do that in the regular way. B'modech shaleven, with the stone pestle. V'hamelach b'modech shaleitz. And salt, there has to be a shinui, but a much smaller shinui than what Beishamai said. You don't have to use a flask or a ladle. You can use also a pestle, but a wooden pestle. So both Beishamai and Beis Hillel agree that regarding salt, there should be some kind of a shinui, but the question is how much of a shinui. So there's the main point of the Mishnah here is a distinction between where you pound and crush the tavlin, spices, and salt. What's the reason for this difference? The Gemara explains. Dr. Gemara, the Kula Alma Miyas, everybody agrees, Melach boy shinui. That when it comes to crushing the salt, you have to do it with a shinui on Yantif. Question is how much of a shinui, but what's the reason for the shinui? My time. Rav Huna, Rav Chista, so there's an argument between Rav Huna and Rav Chista about this. Chad Omar, so one of them says the reason is because kol ha-kedeiris kulon tzrichis melach. No matter what you're cooking, every pot needs salt to be added to it. Ve'en kol ha-kedeiris tzrichis tavlin. And not every pot, not every dish needs to have the spices that you're using. So therefore, as Rashi explains, when it comes to something that you know that you're going to need it on Yantif, so then you could prepare it before Yantif and you should prepare it before Yantif. But on the other hand, something that you didn't know you're going to need before Yantif, so that you're not expected to prepare it before Yantif, so therefore you can do it on Yantif. So therefore the salt, you knew you're going to need the salt, so why didn't you crush it before Yantif? Whereas the tavlin, you didn't know you're going to need before Yantif, so therefore you can crush it on Yantif according to Beis Hillel without any shinui whatsoever. This is a very fundamental point regarding Yantif, regarding malachas being done on Yantif, that anything that you know that could have been done before Yantif, Chazal didn't allow to do on Yantif. Minat Teire, the malachas of Eichel Nefesh are allowed to be done on Yantif, whether you know that you were going to need it on Yantif, whether you didn't know, makes no difference. Chazal were Mesakin, and the Alter Rebbe brings from the Rambam, the reason is because Chazal didn't want Simchas Yantif to be disturbed. If a person is going to leave all those things that you could prepare before Yantif to be done on Yantif, so then it's going to come Yantif, and on Yantif you're going to start working and preparing and doing everything that could have been done before. You won't have time to sit and enjoy Yantif. Therefore, they were Mesakin, Takane, whatever could be done before, should not be done on Yantif, and even if it's done on Yantif, it should be done with a shinui. So this is one reason. Chad Omar, another opinion was, based on a similar point, but it's not a different shot here, that kol hatavlin mafigin taiman. When it comes to the spices, so they lose their flavor. If you do it from yesterday, so the sharpness goes away. So therefore, it's not something that could be done yesterday. I mean, it's not going to be the same taste. Melach eina mafigin taima. But when it comes to salt, the salt doesn't lose its taste if you crush it from before Yantif. So again, the same point, it could have been done from before Yantif. And if it could be done before Yantif, Chazal and Mesakin, that it has to be done before Yantif. Zak the Gemara, my benayim. What's the difference between these two reasons that we just said? Ikke benayim. So the Gemara gives two situations where you could have a nafkamina. Ikke benayim. So one difference would be the yoda maikdeire boy levishuli. When a person knows exactly what kind of food, what kind of pot he's going to be cooking, so therefore the person knows the spices that he needs. So therefore, even regarding the spices, you say that he should have done it from yesterday, and therefore if he's doing it today, he has to make a shinui. That's one nafkamina. This is according to the first reason, what the point was that he didn't know, but over here he does know. Inami, or nafkamina based on the second reason, b'merike. Merike is, if you have the translation over there, some kind of a spice that even when you prepare it from a day before, it does not lose its flavor. So you can't, what is it? Saffron, okay. So it does not lose its flavor. So you can't say that he couldn't do it from yesterday. He could have done it from yesterday. So therefore, even this, it's a spice, but you do it on Yantiv, you should do it with the shini, because he knew he could have done it from yesterday. Amar Rav Yudah Mashmuel call on nidoichen. Anytime you're pounding anything, any of these spices, nidoichen kedarkan. You could do it in the regular way that you do it during the week. Va'afila melach. And even when it comes to salt, even though in the Mishnah it said that everybody agrees, even Beis Hillel agrees that salt is something that you have to pound it, you have to crush it with a shinui, but he said even salt can be done without a shinui. Fragt the Gemara, but va'amre, didn't you say, what it says here in the Mishnah, that melach by shinui, that everybody agrees that by salt, it does require a shinui when you're coming to pound it. And for the Gemara, hu da'ama ki haytana. Rav Yudah Mashmuel is following the following opinion here, which says different than what it says in our Mishnah. Tanya, in a Braisa we learned, Amar Rav Meir said, le'nechloku be'shamai be'Beis Hillel. There is no machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Ala nidoichin, shenidoichin kedarkan. When you come to pound whatever spices it is, you could do it in the regular way. Umelach iman, and then since the spices are allowed to be done in the regular way, so you can put the salt together with the spices. If the salt is being pounded together with the spices, even though usually for the salt maybe you would need a shinui, but if it's being done together with the spices, over there everybody would agree that it could be done together without a shinui. When is there machlokes? If you want to pound the salt separately, Beis Shammai says it needs a shinui. Melach, bepach, or be'etza porer. That the melach, when you crush it, has to be done either with a flask or with a ladle, and not in the regular way. Litzli, and this is if you're using the amount of salt that you use for tzli, for roasting. Avaloi likedera, but not for the pat. For the pat, you need much more salt, so you're not allowed to do that on Yontif. So only for tzli you're allowed. Or Beis Hillel Aimrim, and Beis Hillel says b'chol davar. Even when it comes to the salt, and you're doing the salt separately, not together with the other spices that you're allowed to pound on Yontif, but still you could do it alone without any shinui. But the Gemara just clarifies this lashon of b'chol davar. What does b'chol davar mean? B'chol davar sol kedaitoch. Does b'chol davar literally mean you could use any utensil to pound the salt? And Rashi says the Gemara's question is, there could be a utensil which is malachtoi le'isser and it's muktzeh. Are you allowed to use even a muktzeh item to go and pound the salt? How could you use such an expression of b'chol davar? So the Gemara answers, no. Ela ema lichol davar. What Beis Hillel was saying is not bichol davar, but lichol davar you can use to crush the salt for any amount, even whether for roasting, whether for the more salt that you need for a pat. Either way, you can use it for any amount of salt. That's what he meant to say. But nevertheless, as Rashi explains, the point still remains that when Beis Hillel was saying lichol davar, he was saying that you can crush the salt in any way without any shinui whatsoever. Right? As the Beitza started saying, if you do the salt together with the tavlin, there everybody agrees that you don't need a shinui. When are they arguing if you do the salt alone, whether it needs a shinui or not? Beis Shammai requires a shinui, because salt you could have prepared from before Yantiv, and Beis Hillel still says it does not need a shinui. So it was this opinion over here of Beis Hillel that Rav Yudah Mashmuel was basing what he said on, that you don't need a shinui, even for the salt. Sagt the Gemara, Amalei Rav Ache Bardele Lebrei. Rav Ache Bardele said to his son, Kidaiches, when you are pounding and crushing the spices, atzli atzluye. You should make a shinui, which means you should tilt the utensil that you're using on its side, tilt it, do it with a shinui. V'doch, and that's how you should pound it. Rav Sheishes shama kol buchne. Rav Sheishes heard the sound of a pestle that was pounding spices. Omar, he said, Hailav megave de beisayu. This is not coming from my house, because I wouldn't allow. They know in my house that they're not allowed to do this on Yontif. Fragt the Gemara, how did he know? V'dilma atzluya atzli. Maybe they were pounding it, but they were doing it with the shini. They were tilting the utensil to the side. And for the Gemara, the Shamei Davitzal Kole, he heard the sound that it was clear in a way that he knew that they were using it in the regular way. The Dilmet Tavlin Ava, maybe it was they were crushing the spices, and for spices, Beis Hillel says that you don't need any shinui. Only for salt you need a shinui. So how did he know it's not in his house? And for the Gemara, Tavlin Nevuchim and Abeach Kalayu. When you crush spices, it makes a different sound. It makes a louder sound, or more like a bark. It's not the same as the sound of salt. And he knew that it was the sound of them pounding the salt without any shinui, so therefore he said, this can't be coming from my house. They know that they're not allowed to do this. In other words, he's arguing with what Rav Yudah Mashmuel said before, that you could pound salt without any shinui. So the Gemara Tan Rabbanon, in a Beitza we learned, Ein oisen tisni. You're not allowed to make tisni on Yontif. What's tisni? So Rashi says you take the kernel and you crush it and you divide it into 4 pieces, grits, but it's specifically when it's divided into 4 pieces, into quarters. That's what's called tisni. So you're not allowed to do this on Yontif. Ve'ein kaichim b'machteshes. And you can't pound whatever spices you have in a mortar, the way it's usually done during the week. Frag the Gemara Tarti. This Beitza seems to be saying 2 halachas which are actually a contradiction to each other. Why? Because first it says tisni. Tisni sounds like specifically crushing the kernel into quarters, which takes motirche. Dafke that you're not allowed. And then it says ein koitche b'machteshes, that you're not allowed to b'chlal pound in a mortar in any way. It doesn't make any distinction. And for the Gemara, hachikama. This is how you read the Beitza. You have to read it as one thing. Ma tamei noisen tisni. What's the reason why you can't make these grits that are split into quarters? Lefisha ein kaitchim b'machteshes. Because you're not allowed to pound in a mortar. You're not allowed to do it in the regular way. That's the reason. Frag the Gemara. But if that's the whole point, so just let it say it clearly. V'leima, let it just say ein kaitchim b'machteshes. You're not allowed to pound in a mortar, and that's it. And you know that you're not allowed to make the tisni as well. Why does it have to say the detail of tisni? And for the Gemara, because tani ein kaitchim b'machteshes. If it would just say that you're not allowed to use a mortar, hava amina, I would think to say hana mili b'machteshes gedayla. It's referring to a big mortar, which is the regular size of a mortar that's used during the week. That's how I would teach machteshes. Avul machteshes ketana, if you're using a smaller size, a small mortar, eime shapedami, and then I would say maybe it's a certain shinui, and maybe that is allowed on Yontif. Kamash Malan, that's why the Beitza said that tisni. So Rashi says the Beitza spells out tisni, that you can't make tisni. Why is it? It's saying something specific to tell you that you're never allowed to make this tisni in no way. A large mortar, a small mortar, it makes no difference. So it's coming to tell you that you don't make this distinction between a machteshes gedoyla and a machteshes ketana. So this the Gemara asks, but how could you say so? Vatanya, and another Beitza we learned, ein kaitche b'machteshes gedoyla. You're not allowed to pound in a large mortar. Avul kaitche b'machteshes ketana. In a small mortar, which is a shinu, it's not the way you do it during the week, you are allowed. So the Beitza clearly does make a distinction. So the Gemara brings 2 opinions here. According to the first pshat, the Gemara Taka goes back on what it said before. Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, you're right, we're going to have to say that Ki Tanya Nami, Masnita, the previous Beitza, when it speaks about the Tisni, over there it's also speaking about Machteshes Gedoyla. It's only speaking about a large machteshes, not a small machteshes. In other words, the Beitza before, as Rashi explains, is talking only about a large machteshes. And the Beitza there was saying 2 different halachas. What it was saying is as follows. When it comes to this tisni, which is taking the kernels and dividing it into quarters, that's something that takes more tirche. That's something that's not allowed, whether it's with a large machteshes, whether it's a small machteshes. But otherwise, spices, b'derech klal b'negei to spices, like it said in the second Beitza we quoted there, you're only not allowed to do it in a large mortar, which is the regular way it's done during the week, but in a small mortar it is allowed. So Abaye is paskening that there's a difference between a large mortar and a small mortar. That's one pshat. Rava says you have a contradiction whether you could use a machteshes ketana. It's not a contradiction because loy kashya. Holon, here we're talking about for us here in Bavel, and v'halahu, and here the Beitza is talking about for the people in Eretz Yisrael. What's the difference between us in Bavel and the people in Eretz Yisrael? So Rashi says for the people in Bavel, they didn't have servants that helped them out in the house. In Eretz Yisrael, they had servants that would help them. I guess that was the derech in those times. The people in Eretz Yisrael had more servants in the house. So therefore, in Bavel, because there's no servants, we're not concerned that if we're going to allow them to do it in the small one, they're going to come to do it with a large machteshes. So therefore, they're allowed to do it in a small mortar, and we're not concerned they're going to come to do it with a big one. In Eretz Yisrael, where they have servants, so Rashi says we're afraid they're going to be mezalzel. If we're going to allow them to do it in a small one, they're going to say, look, if you could do it with the small one, we could do it with a large one. So therefore, over there in Eretz Yisrael, they asked it both, the large and the small one. Dr. Gemara, Rav Papa Ikla lebei Mashmuel. Rav Papa was by Mashmuel on a Yontif. Aisi le daisa. They brought him daisa, which is these grits that was pounded on Yontif. They brought him to eat this. V'lo yachal. He didn't want to eat it. Why? Because he held that it was not allowed to be pounded on Yontif. Fragt the Gemara, why not? V'dilbe b'machteshes ketana of dua. Maybe it was done with a small machteshes. We just said with a small machteshes is allowed. Even according to Rava, in Bavel it is allowed. And for the Gemara, the chazeh da v'dayik tfei. He saw that the grits, it was very fine. It had to be done in a large mortar. Fragt the Gemara, but v'dilme me'esmol of dua. Maybe it was prepared from yesterday. How did he know it was prepared from today? And for the Gemara, the chazeh, because he saw the kolif tzare. He saw the appearance had these white streaks in it. He saw that it was freshly pounded. Okay, that's one teretz. Another point the Gemara says, when you get to this that we ask, that maybe it was made in a small machteshes. Shani be'mar Shmuel, the house of Shmuel is different. Even though he lived in Bavel, the ikke pritzusa the avdi. He did have servants in his house, and he's afraid that if they're going to allow, the servants are going to see that they can use this that was pounded today in a small machteshes, they might come to be mezalzel and use a large machteshes. So therefore he didn't want to eat it on Yontif. Now we come to the halacha of Beirer on Yontif. We had this before, but here this is the place where the Mishnah and the Gemara focuses on this. So ha-Beirer kitnius be-Yontif. Someone that's selecting the kitnius from the shells, from the peels on Yontif. So how you do this? Beishamai yemrim, Beishamai say, so Beirer oichel v'oichel. Just like on Shabbos, the only way Beirer is allowed is if you're taking the food. You don't take the psailas, you don't take the impurities, but you take the food and you eat it right away. Then it's allowed, and you have to do it by hand. Beis Hillel says, no, you don't have to do it that way. You can be beirer kedarkai, you select it in the regular way, like you would do it during the week, and becheikai, and you don't have to eat it right away. You put it into your lap, you make a pile of it to eat for later. Bekinun, it can be done with a kinun, which is some kind of a funnel that separates the good from the bad, or betamchoi, in a plate where you shake it and the kernels go to one side and the shells go to the other side. Aval, even according to Beis Hillel, loy betavla, not with this large board, v'loy benafa, v'loy bekvara, and not the different types of sieves, a more coarse sieve, a finer sieve. These are utensils that are used for beirer when you have larger amounts. So you're not allowed to do beirer to prepare for after Yontif. So that's even according to Beis Hillel not allowed. But otherwise, according to Beis Hillel, you could do the beirer in the regular way, which is to take the psailis out and to save it for afterwards. Rabbi Gamliel says even more so. Af madiach v'shayla. You can have the beans and you want to get rid of the bad parts that are there. So what do? You pour water over it, and then the shells and whatever, they rise to the top, and then you can skim it off. You can even do beirer in that way as well. Tanya, we learned in the Braise, Amar Rabbi Gamliel. So Rabbi Gamliel said, so according to one gear says, another gear in the Gemara that it's Shimon Gamliel, right? When was this said over here in the Mishnah that Beis Hillel said that you could take out the psailas, the regular way of beirer, when there's more food than the psailas. But if you have more of the impurities than the food, everybody agrees that you have to take the food, the maniach is psailas, and you leave the psailas. Because it's more tirche. It's harder for you to take out the psailas because you have so much psailas. So therefore, when there's so much psailas, you have to leave the psailas there and you just take the food, even according to Beis Hillel. So the Gemara asks on this, psailas merube ala eichel, if you have much more psailas than the food that's there, mi yikeman deshari, would anyone even allow to do any beirer here? So Rashi and Taisus both explain that the issue is that it's muktzeh. If you have so much psailas there, and the kitnius is stuck between this psailas, all this, it's really all muktzeh. So how are you allowed to do any of this b'chlal on Yontif? So the Gemara answers, what we meant to say is not that there's a lot more psailas. It means when it's more difficult to remove the psailas than to remove the food. But v'zulta b'shiyura, there is less psailas than the food, but like Rashi says, with these psailas is very thin pieces. So it's pashut more of a strenuous activity to take out the little thin pieces of psailas than to take out the larger pieces of food. In such a case, even Beis Hillel would say that you have to take out the eichel and not the psailas. Okay, we paskin, of course, like Beis Hillel, that you can do Beirer on Yantiv, Kedarka, like Beis Hillel says, even if you're taking out the Pseilis, but only in a case where it's less of a strenuous activity to take out the Pseilis, and even if you're not eating it right away. But the thing is, there's one catch. That's only if it's a kind of a Beirer that you couldn't do before Yantiv. Similar to the point that we learned in the previous Mishnah. If it's something you couldn't prepare before Yantiv, then you're allowed to do the Beirer Kedarka and Yantiv. If you could have prepared this Beirer before Yantiv, you're not allowed. So if you have something, if you have a fly or something that fell into something, if you had the issue started on Yantiv itself, then the Beirer is allowed. But if it's something that you could have selected from before, then you're not allowed to do it on Yantiv. That's what the Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch. Even with well, if you Beirer the Eichel itself, so then that's the way you do it on Shabbos. It's the same thing, right? Next thing it said in the Mishnah was Rabbi Gamliel loyme af mediach v'shaila. You're allowed to even put water on it and have the pseilis rise to the top and skim it off. We don't paskin like this, like Rabbi Gamliel. But the Gemara brings the Beitza, Tanya, Amar Rabbi Elazar bat Tzaddik, Kachayim and Hagam shal beis Rabbi Gamliel. This was the custom in the house of Rabbi Gamliel. Shoyim Meviin Dli Mayim, Didli Moli Adoshim. They would bring a barrel full of lentils, Umatzifin of Mayim, and they would spread water over it. And Venimtza Eichel Lemata, and the food, the beans or the lentils would go to the bottom, and the pseilis l'mayla, and the pseilis would rise to the top, float, and they would take it off. Frekte Gemara vatanya ipche, and in Beitza we learned that the opposite would happen, that the lentils would rise to the top, and the pseilis would go to the bottom. And for the Gemara, it depends which pseilis. Like kashi, haba afra, the earth that was mixed in with these lentils, that would go sink to the bottom, and haba begili. But on the straw that was mixed in with these lentils, that would rise to the top, would float on the top, and they would take it off. Zakt Heilige Mishnah, Beis Shammai yoimrim. Beis Shammai says, Ein mishalchem b'yomtiv ela monos. When you're sending food to your neighbor, to your friends on Yontif, so you should only send him prepared portions of food that he could eat today. Like Rashi gives example, you send him pieces of meat, pieces of fish that are cooked and cut. That's the kind of food that you can send to your friend on Yontif. Beis Hillel says, even something that's not prepared yet to eat for today, you can send it to him. You can send him from an animal, a bird, ben chayim, ben shchutim, whether it's still alive, whether it's shechted, you can send him either of these, even though it's not yet prepared to eat for today, but he could prepare it to eat for today. And also, mishalchen yenois, shmanim, saltais, kidneys, wine, oils, and flowers, and beans, avoloitvua. But grains, that's something that you can send, because teichin is not something that you're allowed to do on Yontif. Okay? So because teichin is not allowed, so therefore you shouldn't send it today. But Rab Shimon, mate b'tfuah. Rab Shimon says with the tfuah you also allowed, and the reason is because even if usually you have to pound it and you have to crush it and grind it to make it a flour, but as we learned before in the Gemara, there is a way that you can use the tfuah. If you take a small mortar and you crush it a little bit, you can make a cereal out of it. So even the tfuah is right to be used for today, so you can send them this on Yantif. So the Gemara, Tanya Rav Yechiel taught in the Beitza, Obelvat shelo yasenu b'shuda. Even according to Beis Hillel, that you could send a person all the different kinds of things on Yantiv, but don't have a line of people. In other words, a whole group of people that are going and delivering food. And the reason is because it looks like that they are going to the marketplace. It looks like that they're going to sell this somewhere. Tane and Beitza we learned, Ein shura pchusa mishloisha b'nei yadam. When it says a shura, a group of people, that's no less than 3 people. Boy Ravashi asked a question. How about if it's tlasa gavri, it's 3 people with tlasa mini? But each one of these people is bringing something else. One is bringing the fish, one is bringing the flesh, one is bringing the challah. They're not all bringing the same thing. So what's going to be the din then? Is that like a group of people which is an issue, or no? Each one is bringing their own min. I look at the min, and there's only one person for each min. Teiko. So the Gemara doesn't answer this. Rab Shimon mater b'tvuah. So the Gemara says, Tanya, we learned in the Beitza, Rab Shimon mater b'tvuah kagon chitin. Reason is, even though it wasn't pounded yet, and usually you can't do regular teichin on Yantiv, but still you could pound it with a small machteshes, lasses men ludiyos. You could make ludias, which is some kind of a cereal that you make out of the grits of the grain. Se'oirin, litin lifnei behemtoi. If you're taking barley, you can use it to feed for the animals. Adoshim, lentils could be used. Lasis men risisin, also some kind of a grits. It could be used also to make cereal from it. So therefore, this is also fit to be used on Yontif. Zok the Mishneh, Mishalchin, Kalim. You can send to your friend clothing. Bein tfurim, whether it's already sewed. Bein she'ein tfurim, even clothing that's not sewed. It's also fit to be used on Yontif. V'afal pi sheyesh b'hem klayim. Even if you have clothing that have klayim in it, it's also something that's fit to be used on Yontif, as the Gemara will discuss. V'hein l'tzayrech hamayit, and these they serve a purpose. It can be used for Yontif. Aval loy sandal amasumah. You can't send sandals that have spikes in it. That's not. You can't use that on Yontif. V'loy minol she'ein tofa, and not a shoe that's not sewed together. Also can't be used on Yontif. So that you can't send to your friend on Yontif. Rabbi Yehuda says, af loy minol lavan. Also not a white shoe that wasn't yet painted black because it's mipnei shetzarach uman. It still needs a craftsman to paint it. They didn't wear white shoes. The point there is as follows. Kol shena oisim by b'yomtiv, anything that your friend could have benefit of it on Yontiv itself, that you could send to your friend on Yontiv. But if not, you can't send it to him on Yontiv.
Why?
Because you're sending and you're carrying in the Rosh Hashanah, the tirche, to send it to him for something that has no use on Yontiv, you're not allowed. Frag the Gemara, so bishloi mit tfuren, when you're sending your friend clothing which are sewed, so chazal malbish, so that you can wear as a garment. She'ein tfuren, even if you have a garment that's not sewed yet, so nami chazil chsuye, it's a garment that you can cover yourself with it. Elo kalayim, but it said in the Mishnah even kalayim. Lamai chazal, what could you use kalayim for? You're not allowed to use kalayim, so what's there? What does it say that you can send that for? And for the Gemara, now v'chi teime, if you're going to want to answer and say chazul lemei machtuse, it's fit to place it as like a cushion under you. The issur of kalayim is that you're not allowed to put the kalayim on top of you, that it should cover you in any way. But if it's below you and to sit on it, maybe that's allowed. Frag the Gemara, but that's not true because what Tanya, we learned in the Beitza, the Torah says lo yala lechom, that you should not have the kalayim as a garment on top of you to cover you. So now tachtech. You are allowed to use kalayim to sit on it, under you, or to lie on it. But nevertheless, there's a gzeira that Chachamim said also that it's not allowed. Why? Also lasses came. Shema tichrech loy nima al basare. Maybe one thread of this kalayim will come and go on top of you and will cover you and not just be below you, and therefore it's not allowed. There's two pshatim here in Rashi, what this means, because really if you just have mamish, literally one tiny thread that goes on top of you, there's no issue of kalayim either then. Because the issue of kalayim is when it actually gives you some benefit, when it covers you and it gives you some warmth or some benefit. If you have a tiny little thread, it doesn't give you anything. So Rashi says either we're talking about a gluf kirin, and Rashi says shekairin coat, a coat, you have a very thick kalayim, and even one little thread of it is enough to make you warm. It could give you something. That's the gzeira. Or Rashi says another pshat, since you're sitting on it, and then one thread of that garment that you're sitting on goes on top of you, even if it's just one thread, it'll be an issue of kalayim, because you are really getting something from this kalayim that's below you. Elamai, the Torah says, has to be lamaila. So if there's even one thing that goes lamaila, it's mitztaref with it that's under you, that it's warming you, and therefore there'll be an issue of kalayim. So there was a gzeira of Chazal that you can't use kalayim in any way. Now, frag the Gemara, but maybe he still could use this kalayim in a different way. How is that? V'chi taime the mafsik midi beini. You're not going to sit on it directly. You have something that's separating. It's the few layers, and this kalayim is further down below. But that's also not allowed. V'amar Rab Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Amar Rabbi Yossi ben Shaul, Amar Rabbi Mishum Kahola Kadishib Yerushalayim, in the name of the holy congregation in Yerushalayim, Afila Esem Matzoi Zu Agabizu, even if you have 10 sheets, one on top of the other, the kalayim tachtein, and kalayim is all the way at the bottom layer, also lishan aleya. You're not allowed to sleep on it. The gzeira still applies. They made the gzeira without any change. So therefore, the question is, what could you use this kalayim that you would be sending to your friend on Yontif? And for the Gemara, ela beviloin. So what are you going to say? You can use it as a curtain. And there's no issue of kalayim. Frag the Gemara, but that's also not allowed, because va'ama ula said, v'pnei ma omru viloin tami. Why was it said that viloin is makabel tumah? A curtain is makabel tumah. Usually a wall of a house is not a beget, it's not makabel tumah. Why is a curtain makabel tumah? Because sometimes the shamish, the waiter, the servant in the house, he doesn't have proper clothing wearing, so he uses the curtain to wrap himself in it, so he uses it as a garment. So therefore it is used as a garment. So what do you see? That even a viloin is used sometimes as a garment. So you can't make a curtain from kalayim. So that can't be the purpose why you're sending it. And for the Gemara, Ella, what kind of a kalayim is our Mishnah talking about? Bekashin. It's talking about a material that's very rough and therefore does not give the person any benefit, doesn't give the person any warmth, and therefore you're allowed to sit on it. There's actually a machlokes here between Rashi and Taisus. If you look at Rashi, the first Rashi says, Mutta leishav alei, because it's a rough material, so you're allowed to sit on it. From Rashi, it's mashma, you sit on it, yeah, but you're still not allowed to wear it. Taisus says that it's mashma from the Pshat in the Gemara, that because it's kashin, it's a rough material, you're allowed to use it even to wear it. There's no is of kalayim in such a case where it doesn't give you any warmth whatsoever. V'chiyad amar Avuna bereid Rav Yeshua, hai namta gamda denarish. Some kind of a tough material from this place, narish. That's they use it in such a way that that doesn't give a person any warmth. Sharia, it's allowed. It's allowed to be used in Yontif. You have the exact translation over there. What is it?
It's heartfelt.
It's a heartfelt. Okay. Amar Rav Papa, a similar thing. Rav Papa said, Erdalin, which literally is translated as like the undershoes or the overshoes, rubbers, what we call today rubbers, but in those times it wasn't made of rubbers, it was made of kalayim, it was made from some kind of a rough material that they put under the shoes. Ein be'em mishum kalayim, there's no issue of kalayim because it's a rough material and it doesn't give the person any warmth.